We've been taught that good health care is visiting doctors regularly and getting tested so that you can catch your diseases early and get medicated for them. So that's really in our culture. That's the way medicine is treated and healthcare is treated. Of course, that's degenerated into taking healthy people and finding something wrong with them that isn't wrong with them. Disease mongering, it's degenerated quite a bit. But the whole culture and what everybody thinks they know about disease and disease causation, including medical doctors, is that disease is caused by genetics and bad luck. It's like you're walking down the street one day and you develop lupus because it's just a random kind of thing that strikes you on the sidewalk. And of course we know that's not true, but that's what doctors believe, or it runs in your family. Well, so do diet and lifestyle habits run in families too. And so it's very difficult to shift this. And I feel very strongly about this issue. The way we will change it is one person at a time at the grassroots, because what's happened, there's so much money to be made in this disease model that we're discussing here. Show up in doctors' offices, tests to identify conditions early, and then because they're not your fault and you nothing you can do about it, drugs and procedures. There's so much money in it that it's never going to change from within. I mean, it would be lovely to think that some medical institution is going to say, I know we take in $500 million a year from heart bypass surgery, but we're not going to do that anymore because we're good people. Right. It's not going to happen. So the government's not going to fix it. The people making money from it are not going to fix it. So the consumers have to be educated to make better choices. And, I have a chapter in my book, Food Over Medicine, managing your doctor. The most important word you can learn how to say is no.
Right.
No to all of this.
This is episode 6 of the Ownstream podcast, featuring Dr. Pam Popper. Welcome to the Ownstream podcast. We are delighted that you are with us this week. We're super excited for this episode. We're big proponents. We'll just lay this bare at the outset. We are big proponents for the whole food, plant-based diet. We prefer to call it that rather than vegan, though they are obviously pretty much the same thing. Teresa will talk about that in a second. But this is with Dr. Pam Popper, who is really a leader in the small but super powerful, supercharged community of leaders within the medicine field who are advocating for a whole foods, plant-based diet. And Teresa will talk about kind of how we met Pam. She's actually a connection of ours. She's not just somebody that we've only interviewed. We've talked to her on a number of other occasions, and she is absolutely fabulous. And I think this podcast is easily the most important one released thus far. We're really, really, really proud of this one.
Yeah, Pam is really important personally in our own lives, and she has an ambitious and important mission to create an alternative healthcare system that actually promotes health, empowers people to be in charge of their own health, which is not the one we have today. For many years, I yearned toward a vegan diet. I just knew that was right for me. I had become a vegetarian when I was young, and I'll get into my own journey. Stephen and I are going to do an upcoming podcast that really delves specifically into our journey with the whole food plant-based diet. But, essentially, I struggled with my own diet for many years, and Stephen and I watched Forks Over Knives, the excellent documentary on this topic about 5 years ago, and, we both looked at each other and sort of had that, well, that's it moment where we just couldn't deny this anymore, I knew it in my bones for a long time intuitively, and Stephen did too. Yeah. So Pam's featured in that movie along with a number of just inspiring, courageous, wise other doctors in the field, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. McDougall Barnard, they're just leading the charge. And anyway, I changed my diet. Stephen changed his diet at that point. And, I also, and we both have, I have had family members struggling with chronic disease, My father died of cancer about a year after that, after we had changed our diet. And, he had had a number of different cancers over the years. And, initially he'd had colon cancer and recovered from that, making some lifestyle changes, actually, and then had kind of reversed some of those lifestyle changes. So anyway, I was personally very passionate about this from my own journey and seeing family members struggle with chronic disease, knowing that it's preventable, I think these doctors say something like 99.9% of these diseases, and I mean heart disease, diabetes, cancer, which are killing so many people in eating a Western diet, are preventable and reversible with a whole foods plant-based diet. So I got so passionate about this, and I, sought out Pam, because Pam runs a place called the Wellness Forum, which has created an entire educational curriculum around teaching people how to use their diet and lifestyle to prevent and reverse disease, and specifically a whole food plant-based diet. And Pam, she'll talk about this a little bit. She says, 100% is not necessarily possible for everyone. And so she has created a diet that's really workable for people, that allows for treats now and then, but real treats, not like I'm eating a pizza every Friday, or like I eat birthday cake 3 times a week, or,
right.
like that really manages to make 95, 90, I don't know what percentage she say, of your diet whole foods plant-based. And what it is, it's a real lifestyle. And I have, again, we'll talk about this in another podcast. I've been on my own journey with diets and fad diets and weight fluctuations up and down, like I know so many people have. And the thing about those diets is they're not sustainable and often very not healthy.
And severe.
Very severe, It's like cutting out an entire category of foods that are actually, some of which are very healthy. Carbs is a good example. I always joke that I had a trainer once who told me to stop eating broccoli, because because it was a carb. It's just some of those, and it just doesn't work, and it's not good for your body. So, the whole food plant-based diet, Stephen said, it's similar to vegan, but it is vegan in the sense that it's about eating vegan foods. However, I've been an unhealthy vegan. You can be vegan and eat these days vegan cupcakes, vegan, sausage, vegan, like a lot of processed foods.
Turkey.
Yeah, and this is about eating real food. That's it. It's about eating real food, and you have so many options. It's a lifestyle. We talk on our website about how it's a lifestyle. It's not about very selected foods.
And so what we'll leave you with is the notion that if you think about medicine and you think about the typical approach to medicine, this has always struck me as how bloody confusing and complicated and baffling it is. And as Pam points out, how thoroughly ineffective it is. Like we have no cure for cancer. We have no cure for heart disease. We have no cure for diabetes through the medicine path, if you will. And listening to Pam, I think you'll find this, and certainly watching Forks Over Knives. If you have not watched that film and this content is even remotely interesting to you, you owe it to yourself, your family, your kids, everybody that comes in your wake to watch that film. It's that important. But is how simple it is. Well, of course, the rising rates of heart disease, cancer, and diabetes are tied to this horrendous diet we eat. Sugar, saturated fat, meats, dairy products, which Pam will tell you what dairy products actually are. I won't ruin that for you, but she will tell you what that actually is when you're ingesting that. So the simplicity of this message is so powerful that to us it rang so true when we heard it the first time. So we'll leave you with that. We will be back afterwards to wrap up. Until then, we're so excited for you. Please enjoy this terrific interview with Dr. Pam Popper.
So Pam, we're thrilled to have you on the podcast, and you've been an inspiration to me for a long time. I was just looking through my emails to find out when I'd first reached out to you, and it was 4 years ago, and I'd been doing a plant-based diet for about a year and had watched Forks Over Knives and was very passionate about helping other people find this way of life, which I think about it as a way of life, not just a way of eating. And my father had died of cancer, and I'd had a number of family members with cancer. And I wanted to get into this field, so I had reached out to you about taking some courses at the Wellness Forum. And that's how I came to know you. So we wanted to start out by just asking you, Pam, I know from taking your classes and reading your book, Food Over Medicine, and seeing you in movies that you're obviously an expert in diet and wellness, and you've been interviewed in many of the big documentaries about the role of food and lifestyle and disease, prominently Forks Over Knives and recently Food Choices. But there was a time in your life when you were not so healthy or well, and you didn't feel good in your body, and you weren't doing this thing. So can you tell us about what you used to be like, what it was like then, and what happened?
Yeah, and you missed I was fat on top of everything else. But I think I grew up like a lot of people did, where food was what tasted good. I mean, that's what I came from a family of European immigrants, so there were some good cooks in the family, and we ate better than most people. Part of it was because my family members were scratch cooks, and part of it was because when I was a kid we didn't have any money, nor did you see all this restaurant eating and stuff that went on. But having said that, lots of animal food, lots of dairy, and other than those silly health classes that you took in school, I don't remember really talking about diet and health or food and its importance in health or anything like that. So I guess it's not shocking that, I grew up and left home, and you get busy with your life, and if your dietary habits aren't really good to begin with, they get a whole lot worse really, really fast, and that's what happened to me. And I degenerated to the place where I was literally living on cookies, coffee, and cheese. Those were like the staples of my diet. I thought caffeine and sugar were like your major food groups, and then anything else was kind of supplemental. And the tireder I got, which, that kind of diet will make you tired, the more caffeine it seemed to take to, just keep me awake and functioning. And, of course, that type of diet will also promote weight gain, which was exacerbated by the fact that I didn't exercise. That totally went out the window. Every once in a while during this 20-year period of time, I'd do the New Year's Day resolution thing, go join a gym, visit 4 times, and never go back. Yeah. So that was, I tell people, I used to put my garbage cans on the hood of the car and drive them to the street because, not moving seemed to be the goal. And so, and I've had every bad habit known to man. I mean, I used to smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day, too. And people say 4 packs of cigarettes. Well, I don't do anything in moderation. So if you're going to pick up a bad habit, you should just do as much of that as you can, too.
Wow.
Yeah. So I quit smoking. I finally quit smoking, but the bad eating and the not exercising continued. And so when I was 38 years old, I was overweight. I mean, from a body fat perspective, you probably could call me obese. I had bags under my eyes. My skin didn't look so good. I was tired a lot. And what I find so interesting looking back is that it didn't seem like I was all that different from everybody else my age. And I think about it now, being tired and overweight and bags under your eyes and your skin doesn't look good, that's not good for any age, let alone, for crying out loud, 38, right? So that's the condition I was in when I made this change. I came from behind, we could say.
And was there anything in there? Was there a moment where you got pointed in a new direction? Maybe you read a book, or you just felt badly and somebody gave you a good piece of advice? Talk about the change or the transition.
Well, the interesting thing about my situation is I had actually had a health scare. I had cervical dysplasia. And, I was told, lots of women have this. It's not a big deal. Mine was serious enough that I had to have a lead conization, which is done under a general anesthesia. And the best, I would put air quotes around that, OB-GYN in the city, who is the person I was seeing at that time for health care, sent me home to keep eating cheese and, just doing what I was doing. I wasn't smoking by that point in time, but all the dietary habits were terrible. So even a health scare didn't really bring about any change. What happened, it was just a very accidental thing. I read an article in a magazine about diet and health, and I didn't know anything about diet and health. I came from a business background, but I don't think you have to know a lot about diet and health to realize that if you're living on cookies, coffee, and cheese, things aren't so good. And you look in the mirror and you're fat, that's not good, right? So it's like, okay, I get this. And I mentioned offhanded, it was just a very casual comment to a friend of mine that I had read this article and it was interesting. And this woman and her husband had lived in San Francisco, and they knew John McDougall and his wife, and they had gone to a couple of their programs. And so she said, well, if you're interested in nutrition, the person you want to learn from is this guy. She said, read this book. And, of course, this was a long time ago, so there wasn't any internet. I mean, you can go to John McDougall's website and read articles till the end of time and see videos. But I read this book. It was the original McDougall plan that he had written at the beginning of his career in California, once he had moved back to California. And I just thought this was incredibly fascinating, because here was a doctor who was curing people of disease with diet. And I thought, I think we all get a little arrogant. I'm educated. I'm smart. I think I know what's going on. So how is it that this could have escaped me that I had no idea? So that's where my interest began. And I've told John this. In fact, we've become friends. As you know, we're in Food Choices together and Forks Over Knives. And he's been a great supporter of mine, and I've sent a lot of people to his program, and I consider him a good friend. I tell John all the time, isn't it good that I read your book instead of the Adkins book? Because we would sure be having a different discussion, right? He says, Pam, I would like to think that if you'd read the Adkins book, you would have seen through that crap. I said, well, I don't know back in those days, but I'm lucky it was your book, because that was the beginning of this whole path that I ended up on.
And so what did you do once you read that book? A lot of people, I think, a lot of people feel badly about themselves. They know they're overweight. They don't feel good. But like you said, you kind of look around and a lot of people are eating the same way. Don't know that some people, we don't really know. That's kind of the diet that's promoted, at least the meat and dairy part of it, maybe not the cookies, and anymore. And, but a lot of people feel badly and they might try a diet or try this or that and can't ever make a change. What do you think, what happened then? What helped you to actually make that change?
Well, it made sense to me. And again, my all or nothing, jump in, do everything to excess. Sometimes that's not so good. It wasn't so good with cookies and coffee, but it was really good with this. So I just decided I'm going to do this. And I didn't do it right. One of the problems I had in the beginning, is one of the reasons I started my company, is that I had John McDougall's book, and there were some recipes in the book, so I had some stuff to make. But what I really got screwed up on in the beginning was I understood I wasn't going to eat meat and dairy. What I didn't understand is that substitutes for all the crappy things I was eating really wasn't going to help much. So I did the junk food version of the vegan diet. So I was eating, vegan cheese, or I don't even know if we had a lot of vegan cheese. It might have been just vegetarian cheese back then, and fake chicken nuggets and fruit juice sweetened cookies and baked potato chips. And so I did all that. I think I got just a little bit fatter actually in the beginning, and then I realized this can't be what I looked at the book again and Mary's recipes. I'm thinking I think what I'm supposed to be doing is eating food. What a concept, right? So once I got the whole food part of it right. Which, I probably did 3 or 4 months of the wrong thing and then got on the right track. And what happened was, out of this very overweight and not so healthy-looking person, I shed all those excess pounds, and my skin cleared up, and I started to become athletic. I mean, I would run into people, and they would go, "Who are you, and what'd you do with Pam? You don't even look like the same person."
Right.
Ran a marathon, which was, for a person who didn't walk to the end of the driveway, running a marathon was really, kind of a bizarre thing. But that's what happened for me. And so now the good news is people who make this change today, there are so many documentaries. You could till the end of days find recipes online and never run out of new things to try. And there are podcasts and articles, and you can get the right idea so much faster than when I tried this in the beginning. But that's basically what happened. I just did it. And I never thought about not doing it, because once something makes sense to me, and it really doesn't matter if it's related to business or if it's related to anything. I mean, if it makes sense, I'm just going to do it. Now, I realize everybody's process is not like that, but that was mine.
I can relate to the vegan junk food diet. The first time I tried the vegan diet was for a month. I think it was 2010 or 2011. And overnight, The deli meat got replaced with the tofu deli meat and tofu cheese and those tofuti cuties. I was like, this isn't so bad, but I didn't feel any better. And what I've noticed is, for anybody who's contemplating making this shift, is that once, if you really take it on, you start feeling better fairly soon after you begin, and it begins to create its own momentum. It now is pulling me forward rather than me having to push in any way, if that makes any sense.
The problem is that we all degenerate slowly. In other words, if I had been in great shape, eating optimally one day, and then the next day I was in the shape that I was in at the age of 38, I would have said, oh my gosh, what happened?
Right.
I mean, I got to do something.
That Snickers bar really settled in.
It's a 20-year. Every single day you just come down a tiny little bit. It's imperceptible. And then one day you wake up and you're in this condition and you don't know that there's anything else besides this condition. And so what I think happens, to your point, is that you get used to not feeling well and not feeling energetic and all that kind of stuff. And then once you start feeling wonderful and energetic and all that sort of thing, you can't stand to feel bad. And so I've been asked this question a bunch of times. People will say, well, don't you ever go to a wedding reception or something and just feel like pigging out on cookies or cheese or something? And I tell them no, because it's to me it's the same thing as why I don't want to have 12 glasses of wine. I mean, not that I ever thought that was a whole lot of fun to begin with, but why would, there's nothing attractive about the next morning if you do that. And there's nothing attractive about eating a bunch of fat and having your system feel sluggish and, being gassy and bloated and the stuff that comes with just eating garbage. And so you do start to crave good food, and you look at bad food. And I don't eat a perfect diet. I mean, I'm known to eat a dessert and have a glass of wine once in a while, but you just don't have much desire to veer very far off the reservation because the consequences just aren't fun. There's nothing fun about it.
Yeah. So after you had this personal experience, you went to naturopathic school, right?
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about that and then how that led you to develop the Wellness Forum?
Well, actually, I had started, it's now Wellness Forum Health, before I ever went to naturopathy school. And what happened was at some point in time I decided I was going to pursue more education. And the first part of it was getting some more nutrition training. And frankly, the choices that were available were just terrible. And so that was the beginning of the idea. I've got to start a school. Somebody's got to do something about this. And so, I picked the best of the bad options and earned an MS and a PhD in nutrition. Got a lot of supplemental training. I mean, fortunately, John McDougall was on my radar and a few other people. So I was doing a fair amount of reading and research to sort out the incorrect things I was learning in school at that time versus what were the right ideas. And then when I decided I was going to go beyond that and get some education, at the time I really wanted to go to medical school, and I certainly could have afforded to do it and all that sort of thing. The problem was complicated personal life, kids, and all that sort of thing. It just wasn't practical for me to pick up and go. So I chose to go to naturopathy school. It was closer to my scope of practice anyway. But I found that an equally disappointing experience. And the reason I say that, part of it was right on. I mean, anatomy and biochemistry and pharmacology, and I mean, those things just are what they are. The mechanism of action for a statin drug, we don't have a lot of debate about that. The problem that I saw with naturopathy school is it was treatment and addressing health conditions for the most part within the same paradigm, which I'd already learned was incorrect, which is you give me a symptom and I give you stuff. Now, if I'm a medical doctor, I give you drugs. If I'm a naturopath, I give you supplements. But the problem that we have is that you still have the disease. So the example I always use that makes it crystal clear is you go to a physician with pain, a medical doctor, and you have arthritis pain, and the doctor says, I'm going to prescribe a COX-2 inhibitor. And you get online and you look at that and you say, I don't want to do that. So you go see a naturopath who says, you're right, you shouldn't take that. Glucosamine's a better option. Well, whether you're killing the pain with glucosamine, and it does work for a lot of people, or you're killing the pain with a COX-2 inhibitor, you still have progressing arthritis. Your problem is not solved. And so I found myself in a situation where I knew a lot of what I was learning was wrong, had to basically say what was expected, and then I would go on after I graduated and do something different. And I think that's what a lot of people in all branches of medicine have to do. And so all this has brought me to the place where, unfortunately, I find myself being disliked by medical doctors because I'm very critical of many of them. And then the naturopathic community is particularly hostile to me because they feel that I've turned on them and that certainly I should have used my celebrity in the last few years to promote their cause. And I can't do that because I just don't think it's much better. In fact, in many instances, it's far worse than medical training and medical doctor options. So that's my story about naturopathy. It might surprise you a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it really kind of cuts into why this diet is so effective. One thing that I've come to, at least, and I don't think it's unfair to be sweeping in such a generalization, but that many of the health problems that people face, the symptoms can be treated with either design of medicine, but the cause so often comes back to diet. And the standard American diet, which I guess some of us refer to as the SAD diet, sad.
It is sad.
It's very sad.
It is that.
But it's taught, or it's not taught in medical school, but people coming out of the medical with their MDs aren't really taught nutrition. There's no focus on it. It's really sort of an afterthought, isn't it?
It's an afterthought in medical training, traditional MD training. In naturopathy school, it's actually far worse. It's almost better to learn nothing than to have a lot of concentration on the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And so in naturopathy school, the emphasis is, first of all, on a lot of unproven stuff all around, but somewhat, tailoring the diet to the person, which I agree with that to a certain extent. There are variations on the plant-based diet. For example, Dr. Esselstyn would be the first person to say not everybody needs to eat the very strict diet that he teaches, but his terminal cardiac patients certainly do. So there's room for variation, but this idea that, some people like the Mediterranean diet and some people like the vegan diet and others like the, no-grain diet and all this kind of stuff, it's ridiculous. I mean, the analogy would be telling a medical doctor, well, if somebody has a life-threatening bacterial infection, some people like antibiotics, other people not so much. I mean, that would be insanity, right? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the way diet was presented in my training is, different things for different people and a lot of, blood type diets and metabolic diets. So I think all around nutrition is taught in the wrong way. And by the way, the remedies for other things that aren't diet related are just as bad. I mean, think about people who have psychological issues. Depression. Let's talk about depression. Yeah. True depression. If you're really depressed, it's a thinking disorder. You have come to view the world in a very unproductive way. And I don't mean that as a judgment call. I mean it as, we've all gotten to the place where we have erroneous thinking about something and we've changed our mind. Well, here's my point. Doctors treat it with drugs. Naturopaths treat it with St. John's wort or vitamin D. And tell me how vitamin D, St. John's wort, or Zoloft change the way you think about anything. They just numb you out so you don't think about anything and you can pretend like nothing's wrong in your life. And so it doesn't matter what we're talking about. The approach is cover up symptoms, often erroneous diagnoses, and treatments that can't possibly do much other than make things worse. And in any other profession, I've said this a lot lately, if healthcare professionals worked in any other profession, they'd be living in their car. Right. They would be starving to death. I mean, think about it. If a car repair shop near you, where you live right now, developed a reputation, let's say they specialize in fixing brakes, only every person who drives off of the parking lot runs into a foam pole or a tree within 3 blocks of the place. I mean, the Attorney General would put them out of business, even if customers didn't just dry up and go away. And yet in the medical field, that's the equivalent of essentially what goes on every day in doctors' offices. Mistreatment, overdiagnosis, overtreatment, treatments that can't possibly work, treatments that just cover up the problem. And people get paid really, really well for showing up every day and producing these results. And in any other profession, they would be out of business.
Well, we want to get into the specifics on the diet, but there's one question that just came up for me, which is, isn't the medical industry, in terms of causes of death in the United States, there's like heart disease, maybe it's cancer, and is it 3 or 4 where
it's
three? So the
It's
medical
3.
industry is number 3 on the causes of death.
It may actually be higher up the list, and there's an interesting story about this. I wrote a couple of articles on it last year. A group in the UK, I believe, did the research on this, and the only thing they looked at was inpatient care. Okay, so people hospitalized. Now, there are 2 sides to this story. One is, if you're in a hospital, you may have something seriously wrong with you, and you can't attribute it all to. It's sometimes hard to sort out, is this medical care, or was this person really in precarious health and may not be medical care. But the point is that there was no accounting in this statistical analysis for the bad advice and misdiagnosis, overdiagnosis, overtreatment of outpatient. So this was a very limited survey, and at that, medical care was the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. So there is some speculation that had it involved all treatment from all sources, it might have been the number 1 cause.
Yeah.
Now, this is not the first study that has shown this. It's maybe the best one that's been done, the most detailed. But even today, long after this came out, and it was sometime, I believe, in the first part of last year, if you go to the Centers for Disease Control website, they do not list healthcare as the 3rd leading cause of death. It's not even in the top 10.
We definitely want to get into the diet and also circle back to what's wrong with the healthcare system. So
okay.
Talk to us a little bit about, so a lot of what you do, right, is you're helping people empower themselves to take charge of their health. And that's through good information about their choices in the medical system and good information about diet. Tell us about what diet you recommend for optimal health, knowing there's all this confusion out there about diet. Tell us what you recommend.
Yeah, well, let's start with the confusion. A lot of the confusion is because we don't set a standard for how we evaluate information. That's maybe the best place to start. How do we arrive at our conclusions here? And one of the things that I decided a few years ago is that I didn't want to engage in arguments with people like, I think this, my opinion is that, and then somebody else gives what they think and their opinion, and then any study that's published in the medical literature, we give it equal weight. Like, I come up with a study that says this, and you come up with a study that says that, and so now how do we resolve the difference, right? So we developed a list of criteria. The criteria include, I won't go through the whole list, but the criteria include things like considering conflicts of interest. Another one would be, is this statistically significant, but it's clinically meaningless to the consumer? You reduce chest pain by 1 episode a week, but the person still has debilitating chest pain. I mean, really, we've got to do better than that, right? So anyway, the first thing is to justify what I'm saying, what I'm going to tell you is that this isn't one of these, let me show you my research, and then somebody else can show me their research, and then we'll have some kind of debate and settle it. You don't have the debate that way. You basically set the bar on how you're going to evaluate the information. And I've had people give me a hard time on this, and I've said, well, here's my criteria. So I'll tell you what, you tell me where you want to, what filter you want me to remove. So, for example, if I remove the chance finding filter, your stuff looks great. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put you on my YouTube channel because I have a really big following, and we'll talk about your great research and how if we just remove the chance finding aspect of it, it looks phenomenal. Then we'll tell my thousands of people that, and they don't want to do that, so it makes them go away. So anyway, the point is we start with a filtering method that allows us to find out what actually is the truth about the right diet for humans. And so here's what it looks like. It's principally plant-based, meaning the diet is based on 4 food groups, principally fruit, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. Let's focus on those 4 foods for a minute. Starchy foods have a major role in an eating plan like ours because you need the calorie density from foods like potatoes and beets and rice and beans and legumes and those kinds of foods, and then copious amounts of fruit and vegetables. But they don't have so much calorie density, which is why you need to include those starchy foods in the diet. And then a little bit of minimally processed foods. I think we have to make this practical for people. So we allow people to have cereal and bread and pasta. And if you try to get somebody to commit, he's 40 years old and you're never going to have another piece of bread as long as you live, I think it's pretty fruitless endeavor. Right. So let's just write that into the plan. It's going to happen. And then, above that, you've got your high-fat plant foods that I want to talk a little bit about those in a minute, but because that's important. Avocados and olives and nuts and seeds. And then, getting the oil out of the diet while we're talking about plant foods, we can have some discussion about that. Making it very low-fat and high-fiber. Reducing significantly animal foods and eliminating is better. No dairy. And then at the very, very top of our pyramid is this little point at the top. You can hardly read it. It's called treats. All right. So what treats are, this is for birthdays and holidays. And I tell so this is another one of those things where we're asking a 40-year-old person to promise to never eat a cookie for the rest of their life. Probably not a lot of mileage in extracting the promise. But if we can say, look, you get, birthday parties, Christmas, Valentine's Day, these are times when you might have a treat, not 11 of them, but a treat. New Year's Eve is a good time for a glass of champagne, but my office is full every day because people are treating themselves 6 times a day.
Yeah.
Right? So we got to purge that stuff from the daily diet, and that's something people can usually live with. And so and that's the basic eating scheme, and it allows for, like I said, it has to be adapted to people's lives. One thing that I can share with you is the research on change is very, very clear. When you ask somebody to make a change, no matter what it relates to, exercise, diet, or a work habit, the reasons why people change, number one, I think it will benefit me, and number two, I can see myself doing it.
Yeah.
And so that's why we structure our eating plan the way that we do. Let's just write cookies into the plan so we're not asking you to make a promise we know you can't keep. Let's assume that you might want to have a piece of toast once in a while, and I'll tell you, if what's standing between you and death is a piece of toast, you've got bigger problems than I can solve. So this is a plan people can live with, and you get a fairly high compliance rate when you teach it this way. So that's our basic eating style. Now, I mentioned I wanted to spend a little bit of time on these high-fat plant foods because in addition to the junk food vegan thing that we talked about earlier, one thing that can happen is people love avocado, they love cashews and almonds and olives and peanut butter and all that kind of stuff. And so that doesn't have to go out of the diet unless you have advanced coronary artery disease. But the rule we give people is eat these foods when they're part of a dish. So if you go to a restaurant and order a black bean wrap and it has a couple of slices of avocado in it, nothing wrong with that. I'll tell you what's not a good plan is you bring home 6 avocados from the grocery store, and you guys have seen this. What happens when you slice open the first avocado? You have to do what very soon? Eat the rest of it, right? And so people start eating a lot of avocado, and they don't realize, a cup of avocado has 21 grams of fat.
Yeah, I think
That's
Stephen and I ate a whole bin of stone bowl of guacamole on our first date.
That's right.
yeah, it's delicious stuff. I mean, I can't stop eating it when I start, which is why you can't have it in the house, But really ratcheting down those foods. And I don't like calorie counting and portion counting, but I do like for people to have some consciousness about calorie density, which is, it's like the oil issue. Trying to count fat grams is a fruitless strategy, but understanding that a tablespoon of oil has 120 calories and 14 grams of fat, understanding that helps you understand that you can't possibly be a lean person in most instances if you're eating a lot of that kind of concentrated calories and fat.
And calorie counting is a really popular method among people. Can you talk a little bit about why that doesn't work?
Oh, well, you can't do it. I mean, here's the problem. Here's the problem.
It's impossible.
Here is the problem. Let's start with me. And I don't want this to sound arrogant, but you said in the beginning, I'm considered one of the world's leading experts about this, okay? So here's the dilemma. Today for lunch, I had roasted some beets in the oven, and I made this great big salad with beets and watermelon radishes and some mushrooms, and it had arugula and some microgreens. And I mean, this is one ginormous, beautiful salad with some balsamic vinaigrette dressing on it. And then I had a couple of baked sweet potatoes. All right, so, and that's fairly simple food compared to like a veggie lasagna or something of that nature. So I have no idea how many calories were in that lunch.
Right.
And so what we would have had to do to figure it out, and think about the practicality of this, I would have had to sort everything into piles on the counter. So we could figure out how much arugula, how much spinach, how much microgreens, how much does the radish weigh, and who wants to? I mean, it would have taken all the fun out of eating it. I mean, by that time it's time to get busy doing the next thing. I would have missed lunch, So that's the problem, is that nobody has the time to do that kind of thing, and these guesstimations of what's in things don't really work out so well. I mean, when I go buy watermelon radishes, which are one of my favorite that I get from our farmers market, they're all different sizes. So it's not like you can say, well, an average watermelon radish. Some of them look like sweet potatoes, and some of them look like regular, Humpty Dump radishes. So there is no average. So you can't figure it out. And one mathematical example I use when I'm teaching this is that a person who eats 2,000 calories a day will consume 7,300,000 calories in 10 years' time. So if your calculations are off by just 5%, which is that's pretty accurate when you think about it, but if you're off by 5%, here's what it means to somebody like me. I weigh 128 pounds. Okay, so I would lose 104 pounds if I didn't eat 5% enough. Okay, so I'm down to 14 pounds. I'm checking out. 20-some pounds, right? I'm done. Or if I ate 5% too much the other way, I can't get through the door of my office.
Oh my gosh.
I gain 130 pounds. It's just ridiculous. So there's no way to do this accurately. And another thing I tell people all the time, I want you putting a lot more time into thinking what you're going to eat than recording what you ate. All right? Let's think about the food choices you're going to make rather than trying to calculate what you just had.
Well, and if you're counting calories, as you just described, is doomed to fail. You can't do it. And what will inevitably happen, I think, as I've seen a few people do this, is they stop eating real food because you can't track the calories, and then you start eating packaged foods where you can't count the calories.
Or it's predictable.
And so then, and before you know it, you're not eating healthily and you're not feeling good. So it's sort of doomed to fail. One thing that's been, I think, a challenge for me in the plant-based diet has been the oil thing. I remember when I first heard Caldwell Esselstyn, the great Dr. Esselstyn, say in Forks Over Knives about eliminating oil, I couldn't conceive that. So, in your salad today, what, if any, dressing did you use, and was there oil in that, and what kinds of alternatives are there to oil-based foods? And I think what we're talking about here is not only like dressings, etc., but also cooking with oil too. Oil is so common. And in fact, many of us are taught that olive oil is good, but don't use the vegetable oils, those really toxic oils that you can buy in the market. But that includes olive oil as well.
Well, here's the problem with oils. Let's talk about that, and then I'll tell you how to do it. The problem with oils is that they are so concentrated in fat and calories. And so just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So here I am. I'm 128 pounds athletic, and, I own a yoga studio and a gym, so it's easy for me to be very physically active, which I am, and I run. In the summertime, I run outside, and in the wintertime, I binge watch Netflix and run on a treadmill. That's how I keep myself running in the winter. But anyway, little things you have to do to make it interesting, right? But anyway, so here's what would happen. If I eat some pretty big salads, I like a lot of greens in my diet. So if I were to just add 3 tablespoons of an oil-based salad dressing a day to one salad, which is not that much really when you think about it, and I didn't change anything else, and I don't know what I'd change. In other words, I don't think I can exercise more without taking chunks of time out of my job, because I do it almost every day now. And so if I don't change something, I'm going to be 37 pounds heavier this day next year.
Wow.
That's how weight promoting it is. So the first thing is we 2/3 of the people in this country are overweight or obese, and I don't see that going away while they're consuming pure liquid fat. That's what it really is. Now, some people will say, but I'm getting away with it. I don't gain weight. And some people don't gain weight no matter how much fat they eat, but their arteries are still being damaged.
Yeah.
And I've always said that one of the big design flaws in humans, it's really the only one I've found. If I were God for a day, I would have nerve endings inside the blood vessels. And so when you damage your blood vessels and start laying down plaque, you would be in excruciating pain, like in the fetal position on the floor. And then it would be so awful, you'd never do that again. And then you would not eat high fat. But see, that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
Your arteries can become quite compromised. You can destroy a lot of endothelial tissue. You can lay down a lot of plaque. You don't even know what's going on. And we now know that plaque, those plaques are filled with saturated fat, of course, but mono and polyunsaturated fat too. And so beyond a certain percentage, fat is fat is fat is fat. It doesn't matter where you're getting it. If you're eating a high-fat diet, your cardiovascular system is eventually going to suffer, even if it doesn't put weight on you. So those are some pretty powerful reasons to get the oil out of the diet. Now, everybody thinks it's going to be so hard, and change is hard. Anything you're going to change is hard. I always tell people, I rearrange the furniture in my house, and my cat takes a month to get used to it. It's hard, rearranging the furniture, right? So anything you change is hard. But just by way of example of how little a difference it makes, when Del Schroff became a business partner here, we built a commercial kitchen for him to get him to come. And there were two things about Del. I don't know if you know this, but he weighed 500 pounds, eating a vegan diet because it was very high in fat. And I said, two things have to happen if you're going to come here. One is you got to get serious about weight loss, and the second is the oil has to come out of the food. And he said, Pammy, that's what he calls me. He says, Pammy, I've been cooking for people for years, and they're used to my food the way that it is, and so what do you want me to tell people? And I said, well, I have an idea. Why don't we take the oil out of the food, and then let's not say anything, and then if somebody asks, we'll tell them why we did it. So that was the plan. So he takes all the oil out of the food. Some of these people had he's been cooking them for 15 or 20 years. Only one person made a comment. He brought all his hundreds of customers with him, and one person said, Del, your food's not as greasy as it used to be. It's really better. That's the only comment. So Nobody missed the oil because the food was so well flavored. He always had a talent for flavoring food. So having said that, to answer directly your question, today in my salad I had balsamic vinaigrette dressing, and there are two really great ones most people have access to. Trader Joe's has a fat-free balsamic dressing that's really good. Huh. And then there's a brand in the grocery stores called Maple Grove, and every grocery store has this. And it comes in just plain balsamic vinaigrette. They've got a pomegranate and a cherry. They're all really good. And so that's what I use on my salads and for like rice and vegetable salads and things of that nature. Nice. And then, in terms of cooking with oil, you just have to learn to do water saute. We teach people to do that. You use, if you're going to make muffins or something like that, use applesauce. You can use vegetable broth and lemon juice and all kinds of substitutes. And a lot of people, as soon as they get the oil out of the diet, they'll say, I didn't lose any weight even eating a vegan diet, but now that I've de-oiled the diet, it's like it's falling off of my body. Well, there's 800 and some calories a day. Some people eat that much oil. When that comes out of the diet, it's amazing how much you'll lean down.
So you said at the beginning, Pam, you talked about having cervical dysplasia, and you said, but I went home, no doctor ever told me to stop going home and eat cheese, right? And I don't think, that struck me there because I don't think most people in the country would connect those two things at all, right? So you said when you were going through your diet pyramid, very quickly, no dairy and very little meat, or ideally none. Can you talk about, these are two big thorns, right? Meat and dairy. Like, what is wrong with meat and dairy, and how are they connected to chronic disease?
Well, let's talk about the dairy first. I mean, everything is wrong about cow's milk. Let's start with babies. In order to give a baby a cow's milk formula, you have to dilute it and then fortify it dilute it by half, because the protein load is so high, you'll blow out the baby's renal system. So this is a food designed to promote growth. And, to turn a 90-pound calf into an 800 or 900-pound animal in a very short period of time, and I say this kind of tongue-in-cheek, a lot of the people, when they arrive here, they're on their way to that type of situation. Yeah. And then the next problem, in addition to the growth promotion, is dairy contains estrogen and estrogen metabolites. Well, most breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive. And so, I don't know about you. I don't want to get breast cancer. And so eating estrogen is not a good way to prevent breast cancer.
Right.
So that's an issue. It's incredibly calorie dense. And this is where again, the consciousness about calories is very important. And it's not just with cow's milk cheese products, but vegan cheeses too. An ounce of cheese, whether it's vegan cheese or cow's milk cheese, has 110 calories. It's almost all fat. And we're talking about like the size of my forefinger. Okay, so the package that looks like it's one serving to you and I, it's actually 10. Well, it's back to the same issue with oil. It's so calorie dense. So the leading cause of juvenile diabetes, dairy products consumed by children. Leading cause of allergy, asthma, chronic infections, multiple sclerosis, osteoporosis. I mean, just nothing, no merits to this food whatsoever. So for those reasons, we just get rid of the dairy in the diet. And it's a hard thing for people to do, mainly because they just have to make the mental connection. And one thing I do to try and help them do that is I say, let's just reframe the discussion. Instead of that creamy cheese on your sandwich, what you should say is, I think I'd like to have a nice slice of estrogen on my sandwich.
Right.
Sound yummy? I'm gonna pour some liquid estrogen on my cereal because I want to feed some breast cancer this morning. That just sounds like such a great plan. And you start thinking about it in these terms, and it becomes a lot easier to give up.
Yikes. Yeah.
I know.
And so what about the meat part of that too?
Well,
Let's talk
the
about
meat
that.
part of it is an interesting thing. You know, the world's healthiest populations are not vegan, actually. But here's what they have in common. Animal food is a very, very tiny part of the diet.
Right.
And it's mainly economics that does this. I mean, you have to be fairly wealthy to eat animal foods 3 times a day and 5 times a day sometimes, and that sort of thing. So it's economically driven. People just don't have the kind of money to buy this stuff all the time. But what you'll see is in rural China, whoever's cooking dinner will take a 7 or 8 ounce chicken breast and slice it real thin, and it serves 7 people in a rice and vegetable dish that so everybody gets like 2 or 3 little slices of chicken. Here in this country, you go to the steakhouse. I watched this just the other day with a group of friends I was with. Somebody ordered a 24-ounce steak. Oh, my gosh, that would feed our hypothetical Chinese family 5 meals, right? So the problem is it's dose-dependent. You have to ratchet it down to a very tiny, tiny part of the diet. And at a certain point in time, it's like fat. No good fat when you exceed this threshold. So people play these games with themselves. I'm going to have fish and chicken instead of beef and pork. And if you're eating a lot of this stuff, it just doesn't matter what flavor you chose. It's toxic.
Yeah.
It increases your risk of cancer and Crohn's disease and autoimmune disease and the whole repertoire of things people don't want to get.
And so one big question, I think, for both Teresa and I, and this is interesting to us in kind of contemplating our long-term health, but also just immediately in our own personal lives, we know people who have either suffered from or died from chronic disease, chronic Western disease. And what dawned on me recently was that a lot of people see, I think most people see the connection between what they eat and their weight. That seems clear, and a lot of that is marketing perhaps. But very few people, which blows my mind, see the connection between what they eat and chronic Western disease, namely heart disease and cancer. Why is there such a disconnect? Where does that come from? What can we do as a collective who do know about this to help those people connect those? Because that seems crucial.
Well, I think that it comes from a lot of different places. It's not taught in medical school. We've been taught that good health care is visiting doctors regularly and getting tested so that you can catch your diseases early and get medicated for them. So that's really in our culture. That's the way medicine is treated and healthcare is treated. Of course, that's degenerated into taking healthy people and finding something wrong with them that isn't wrong with them. Disease mongering, it's degenerated quite a bit. But the whole culture and what everybody thinks they know about disease and disease causation, including medical doctors, is that disease is caused by genetics and bad luck. It's like you're walking down the street one day and you develop lupus because it's just a random kind of thing that strikes you on the sidewalk. And of course, we know that's not true, but that's what doctors believe, or it runs in your family. Well, so do diet and lifestyle habits run in families too. And so it's very difficult to shift this, and I feel very strongly about this issue. The way we will change it is one person at a time at the grassroots, because what's happened, there's so much money to be made in this disease model that we're discussing here. Show up in doctors' offices, tests to identify conditions early, and then because they're not your fault and you nothing you can do about it, drugs and procedures. There's so much money in it that it's never going to change from within. It would be lovely to think that some medical institution is going to say, I know we take in $500 million a year from heart bypass surgery, but we're not going to do that anymore because we're good people. Right. It's not going to happen. And the federal government is completely toothless. In fact, I'll tell you a couple statistics that'll blow your mind. One of Al Gore's signature acts when he was in the Senate was introducing a law that accommodated the drug companies who were complaining that it was too hard to get drugs approved, and it allowed drug companies to finance part of the FDA's budget in the form of fees so that their products could be reviewed faster. So last year, as of October, last time I checked, the drug companies had given the FDA $781 million. Yeah. Now, the next statistic will blow your mind. So the approval rate for drugs last year was about 96%. Now, I want to see the 4% they're turning down. This must be like liquid arsenic, something that somebody proposes liquid arsenic and they say no way. Now, the Centers for Disease Control, Congress also passed a law allowing the CDC to set up a foundation. The drug companies are major contributors. They've given $620 million to the CDC and through this foundation. And so you have federal agencies that are essentially part of the cartel. And I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist when I say that, but they are. They're part of the cartel. So the government's not going to fix it. The people making money from it are not going to fix it. So the consumers have to be educated to make better choices. And, I have a chapter in my book, Food Over Medicine, managing your doctor. The most important word you can learn how to say is no.
Right.
No to all of this.
And you mentioned that there's no nutrition pretty much in medical school. So many doctors don't even know this, right?
But it's worse than that. Doctors don't know about diet, but they don't really, many of them, even know how to read the medical literature. And if they did, they would not be so fascinated with useless things. Let me give you an example. The risk reduction, if you take Crestor, people take statin drugs to lower their cholesterol because they think it will reduce their risk of heart attack, stroke, or death. So if you read the package insert, this is what we show people when they come in here. This is the information that the maker of Crestor puts out. It reduces your risk of heart attack, stroke, or death by 1.2%. If you average all the statin drugs together, it's a 0.7% reduction. Now, obviously, if doctors knew how to read the medical literature, they would never be fascinated with drugs that have such poor performance. This will blow your mind, there is not a single study that has ever shown that there is any such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain that causes psychological disorders. It was completely fabricated, and doctors believed it. And now 25% of the people in the United States are taking psychiatric drugs, 25%.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So the bottom line is that we have, and medical doctors, first of all, let me say this, I'm hard on them because I think they should read, and I think they should figure this out. I did. But having said that, they're poorly trained. I think they go into medicine wanting to help people. They get caught up in institutions that I think are highly corrupt. The rainmakers, you have rainmakers in medical institutions just like you have in Wall Street firms. And there are horrific stories of, one that took place in a little town in California where they ended up building a special center for these two cardiologists who were doing all these procedures, and they had use of the hospital helicopter to go meet big donors at golf course, golf outings and all this kind of stuff. And what this all came down to was they were great rainmakers, which is why the hospital celebrated them, but they were doing unnecessary procedures. And I think the fines were like $50 million. This was back in 1988. The hospital had to pay. So there's value in generating business, not necessarily in giving good health care, which, again, back to the analogy I used before, in any other field, the field would have been taken over by the feds. And failing schools are taken over by the government now. Failing healthcare practices just keep going on and on.
Well, I do want to talk about a few of the myths I think that are popular in our culture, but that are myths. They have no grounding in reality. I think you can quickly dispel a few of these, particularly as people are thinking about possibly transitioning or living the plant-based diet. And the biggest one is protein. Talk about that and about how the plant-based diet more than satisfies our requirements for protein.
Well, a lot of the reverence that we have for protein, for certain isolated nutrients. How do we get the idea having dietary supplements as a source of nutrients instead of food, it happened because of the way various discoveries were made. So the first nutrient that was discovered was protein. Nobody knew there were going to be 100,000 more of them, right? So it's pretty important when you discover one. And so there was immediately this reverence. I mean, experiments were done where protein was withheld from animals and they died. So, and you need protein. You know, humans would die on a zero protein diet if you could arrange such a thing. So protein is important, but it was given much more importance than it turned out it was warranted. So that's where it all started, and there were naysayers from the beginning, people who were saying, wait a minute, this isn't a good idea. One of them was Russell Chittenden, who was doing experiments at Yale in the early 1900s showing that even athletes at Yale were doing really, really well on a low-protein diet. So there were people who were saying this isn't right, but nonetheless, it became the thing to talk about protein. And athletes got the idea that building strong bodies required protein. And of course, all you need is a seed of something that sounds like it could turn into marketing products, and then you're off to the races. Right. Protein powders and protein pills and, amino acid fortified this and that. So over time, this myth just stuck and it grew in importance. And so the reality is that protein needs are really low. And one of the reasons is that amino acids circulate and recirculate throughout the body. And you only have to replace the ones that you just really burn up and they're not usable anymore. And we have a really good way of measuring that because nitrogen is the unique element in protein, makes it different from carbohydrate and fat. So you know how much protein was burned up and used by doing nitrogen excretion tests. And so we know that your protein needs are like 2.5–3% of calories. And if you were to live on the lowest protein plant foods, like rice or potatoes at 8 or 9%, you're getting many times what you need every day.
That's amazing.
And protein deficiency is unknown in well-fed populations. In fact, deficiency conditions, true deficiency conditions, are unknown in well-fed populations. And I used to go to a lot more of these naturopathic conferences. So I just gave up naturopathy. I mean, I don't even like to call myself a naturopath. I'm a recovering naturopath. It's like being in an AA, recovering. Anyway, I started asking people who were talking about all these supplements they prescribe and extra protein, drinks that are needed. I said, where do you practice? I mean, who's coming in your office with scurvy? Who's coming in your office with like classic protein disorders, marasmus, I mean, in Columbus, Ohio, we don't see any of that. We see diseases of excess in here every day. Too much calories, too much protein, too much fat, too much. So we definitely got carried away. But there's no protein deficiency in a well-structured plant-based diet.
And then real quick, when we commonly tell people no milk or dairy, the immediate objection is calcium. What's the story there? What's the real story there?
Well, the real story, first of all, is that calcium needs have been overstated. In places in the world where the fracture rate's very low, the calcium intake is usually between 400 and 700 milligrams a day. And this is where the drug companies aren't the only ones that get involved in setting policies. Supplement companies often get involved in this type of thing, too. So if you set an RDA for calcium that makes it almost impossible to get from food source, you can sell fortified foods, supplements, and you can push cow's milk because it's a high-calcium food, even though the body doesn't absorb much calcium from cow's milk. So that's the place to start, is the RDA for calcium should be, and the research is real clear on this, maybe 500 milligrams, 500 to 700 at the outside. Well, an orange has 120 milligrams of calcium. People don't think of oranges as high-calcium foods, but an orange is 20% of your RDA for calcium. So you don't have calcium deficiency on plant-based diets either. And where bones are the strongest, plant eating is the thing. 4 different research groups, this is kind of interesting, have looked at calcium intake in between 38 and 70-some countries, and none of them were working together or knew each other, but they all arrived at the same conclusion. The higher the calcium intake, the more fractures you get. And I think one of the reasons is that it comes from cow's milk.
Right.
It's amazing. So, we've talked a lot about what's wrong with the healthcare system and, setting artificial bars, profit motive. There's a lot of money to be made, and you talked about individual action. So tell us a little bit about your calling, the work you're doing at the Wellness Forum, and specifically, I know recently you wrote that it's going to take a disruptor from outside the system and that you plan to be that disruptor. So we want to hear about that.
Yeah.
We're the disruptor, and it's only somebody like us that can be. So the problem institutions have, it goes back to what I said before. Any institution, if they stop doing bypass surgery and tell the truth, they won't be in business for very long. So it's going to come from outside. So about 2.5 years ago, I've been in business for 20 years here. And about 2.5 years ago, I had an epiphany one day, and it's like, what we're doing over here, and we've done a great job of it. We're the biggest company in the world that does what we do. But two things had happened. We'd inadvertently invented this specialty called informed medical decision making. Understand the risks and the benefits of anything that you're considering doing, whether it's taking a supplement or having a procedure, before you decide to do it, so that you make an informed choice. What a concept, right? Again, it goes on in every other business. People look online about information to buy a blender, for crying out loud, but they'll have their chest cut open, have bypass surgery, and have no clue as to whether or not it's a good idea. Wow. So we've always been the people who are putting information in front of people, helping them make those kinds of decisions, choosing the right dietary choices based on evidence, and we always had this filtering system that kept us out of the he said, she said, we said kind of discussion. So we'd invented this practice specialty, and then we were showing people how to make better choices. But the problem was they were always going back and interacting with their doctors, in many cases having to educate their doctors about all this information, and then fighting with their doctors. We had still have people going back to their doctor and saying, I was never a candidate for medication. You got to take me off these drugs. The doctor responds, oh, you have to take them for life. No, you don't. I've got 4 articles that say you don't. Here they are. You should read them. So this is ludicrous, right? So I thought, what we need? We need an alternative healthcare system. I mean, I've always sat here in my own little world, not interacting with the rest of the healthcare system anyway. I've had that luxury. So what if we just created a healthcare system in and of itself that did everything from the time you start interacting with healthcare up to, but not inpatient care? I don't want to own hospitals and all that stuff. And the idea started to grow on me as I started to think about, you have assessment tools that are accurate. I take those assessments for insurance companies. They tell me to proceed to the emergency room immediately because I don't have a mammogram and I don't take calcium pills. I think the only thing I do right is I fasten my seatbelt. But anyway, I'm on the verge of death, according to all these people. Right. So we have accurate assessment tools, which we have here. And then we have people who are trained, healthcare professionals who are trained in informed medical decision-making in all disciplines, mental health, musculoskeletal health, and chronic degenerative diseases like the ones we've been talking about this evening. And you have protocols. We've designed protocols for treating these various conditions with diet and other things, too. It's not just diet. You have to do some other things. We already own a school. We're training healthcare professionals. We've been doing that since 2009, and we're going to grow it into a full-fledged private college with a medical school. So we have a training school, and then we have intervention programs for employer sites. We've gotten back into that market this year, and we go into employers and help them lower their costs and build clinics there that service the employer and the surrounding community. And we even have our own insurance programs that we operate as co-ops. So we're the insurer. We own the assessment tools, the insurance company, the interventions, the healthcare providers, and it's all integrated. There's no ineptitude. And so we decided to do this in 2014. And I think when I first said it at one of our conferences, people thought that I had become delusional and maybe was in need of more rest or something. But actually, I wasn't delusional. I knew exactly what I was talking about. And I sat down with the folks who work here and our business partners, and we put together a very detailed plan to make this happen. And it is happening. It's no longer if we do this. It's happening. Every single piece of the plan is happening. It's happening right on or before schedule. Actually, we've beat our own deadlines in many cases. We're moving in this direction. And so here's the end point, and this is unfolding now, is that at some point in time we develop the capacity to siphon off about 10% of the healthcare market. That's about $300 billion a year. Mm-hmm. And with that kind of money, we can solve some problems that I don't think are going to be solvable unless you have that kind of money and it's in private hands. So a good example is Medicare. You can't make any money billing for Medicare, and you can't have the feds telling you what to do anyway. So we've built into our provider contracts, you have to treat 20 Medicare patients for free every year. We're just going to do it for free. Don't worry about reimbursement. They'll have to go pay for their drugs, and some of them are going to need to be medicated, so they'll need Plan B and that sort of thing. But we'll just the care itself, we'll just give it to them. We already have a foundation, and we already provide the type of services here to economically disadvantaged people. We'll just be able to do more of that. You look around the country and you say, we're not going to let poor people eat Velveeta cheese from the food banks, and you've got that kind of money. You set up your own food banks and you give people food that's reasonable for them to eat, like fruits and vegetables and potatoes and beets. And so we think we're going to be able to do that. And so here's the reason I think it's possible. First of all, you've got people hate the healthcare system, and providers hate it as much as consumers. And when you've got that level of dissatisfaction that's ripe for disruption, has to come from outside because the medical institutions will liquidate themselves. A model to draw from was back in the years, a few years ago, a couple decades ago, when the American car makers, 3 car makers in Detroit, controlled the market. And they were fat and arrogant. And they thought, it took 17 signatures to change the paint color on a car at General Motors. And they were selling cars that were overpriced, and they thought they were going to be like this forever. They were just going to control the market. And like little stealth invaders, the foreign car makers came in here, and they decimated the market. They decimated it. And Detroit's never been the same. Right. The car companies have never been the same. They've all been bailed out by the government. The city of Detroit went bankrupt, for crying out loud. So it's been done before, and it will happen here. It is happening here. We are doing it here. And Built to Last, I don't know if you read that book, but building great companies, they say you have to have a big, hairy, audacious goal.
Right.
BHOG. Right. That's our BHOG.
Well, any owner of a BHOG must have some real courage. And I'm curious, like, kind of stepping away from looking at the outside stuff and kind of stepping into you and your makeup. Like, what are the beliefs, or maybe the set of beliefs that you come from with such a grand vision, knowing that there will be resistance around every corner? Where do you get the steam for that?
Well, I come from a family of entrepreneurial people. And, everybody can look back on their childhood and some things you wish had been different and that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you what was great about my childhood is came from European grandparents, came over here and thought that the streets were paved with gold, and all you had to do was work hard, get educated and work hard, and anything that you decided to do, you could do. And I say this only half joking, but, after I started this company, if I'd gone to my parents and said, I want to build nutrition centers on the moon and medical centers there because somebody's got to get there first, my parents would have been the ones who said, that's a great idea. You need to be first. You need any money? What do we do to make this happen, right?
Wow,
so I came from a background of possibility thinking, which makes me one lucky person because many people don't grow up in that environment. They grow up being told all the time how success is for other people, and you have to be, there are limitations, and that sort of thing. So I grew up thinking that just about anything I dreamed up I would be able to do, and I watched my parents do that. My dad's still alive; he works here, but my mom was very, very successful in her business. My dad had an unbelievable career where he influenced a lot the direction of the data processing business. So I think that was part of it. You see something that needs to be solved, and you come up with a way to do it, and there's no reason to think you can't. You can do anything, right? So that's where I came from. And my parents were outside-the-box thinkers, This is a story that a lot of people know. I don't know if I've ever discussed it with you, but most of us who do this kind of work, we end up with problems with the government, and I've had a few go-rounds, one of which was with the state of Ohio, which at one point in time was going to incarcerate me for talking to people about nutrition. And I'll never forget my parents. I had decided I was going to go. It was failure to comply with a subpoena. I just wasn't going to give them the information. And so, you go sit in jail until you come up with the information, or they decide you're never going to do it. So when we were having this discussion, my family sued the government, the whole 9 yards. So we're sitting at the dinner table. I'll never forget this. And I'm telling them, if things don't change, I may be spending some time behind bars. My parents are like, you go, girl. Okay, so we'll take care of things. Don't worry, So a lot of parents would not have been that way, So very principled people, and so it wasn't like I was looking forward to it, but nobody was saying, give them anything they want. I mean, I know people who've been in this situation. It's like their parents are saying, give them anything they want. If you don't do it, I'm going to do it for you. We can't let this happen. My parents, go to jail. It's where you belong because that's how you make a point, So anyway, you have to draw a line in the sand and say this is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And when it's the right thing to do, I will say this, the universe kind of lines up and takes care of things for you. I didn't end up going to jail. Really crazy things happened that lined up for me to not have to do that, and a lot of other things have happened that let me know that this is the right thing to be doing because the planets line up for us in certain ways.
Yeah. Wow. If we weren't an hour and 15 minutes into this conversation, I would probe a little further there because that's really interesting.
Well, we can do another episode, and
I'd
we'll
love
talk
to.
about that kind of thing because the politics of this whole thing are very interesting, not just in view of my case, and I'm talking about this more now because one thing that we've learned in this last election cycle is anger fuels a lot of action. And I think that what we need for people to do that would speed this all up is to get a little angrier about it all, a little angrier about how much we've been lied to, a little angrier about how much we're overcharged. Doctors need to be angry. Physical therapists need to be angry. Nurses, dietitians, and consumers, we all need to be collectively incredibly angry at the deception that has been inflicted on all of us and how it has profoundly affected our lives, taken family members and friends from us. And if we get some real anger going on, I think we'll see this whole thing happen faster than I ever imagined.
Yeah, I agree. And I think by exposing people to the truth, as you are so eloquent in doing, and you and a few others, by the way, I think there should just be a van with you, Drs. McDougall, Campbell, Esselstyn, and maybe Michael Greger, and you guys should, Dr. Barnard, you should just kind of be on set for every documentary about food and diet, because every time we turn on one of these documentaries, it's like, oh yeah, we know them.
Well, my father says, you guys travel in packs. I said, yeah, we're sort of like this plant-based mob in a way.
Awesome.
It's great. Take over, you're all radiant, you just radiate health. It leaps off the screen. It's very attractive, and I think that's, it can attract others.
With healthcare professionals, not many of them are having much fun. And I think one of the things that, and I don't know that people really identify this, they smile a lot when they watch some of these documentaries, but all you hear from doctors is they wish they were architects or plumbers or whatever. They really hate it because, and I would too if I had to practice in some of the settings that they practice in and be subject to some of the rules. But you see these people that are just loving what they're doing. I mean, Dr. Campbell is excited right now about speaking in front of groups and sharing this information as he was 30 years ago, and he's got tons of energy at the age of 82. And so it's a refreshing thing to see people who have a lot of passion for what they do and enjoy the healthcare field. There's not a lot of that going on right now.
Well, we met Dr. Campbell at the Plant Pure Nation screening in New York City. Was that 2 years ago, I think. And I remember we talked to him for a few minutes, and I kept looking at his skin, almost like it was a little weird. Like, his skin was so perfect. It looked like he had just come off the beaches of Hawaii or something. Clearly he hadn't, because he's been on this tour with sitting in movie theaters around the country. But there's something about eating this plant-based diet. It not only changes your energy, but you start looking better, you start feeling better. And after eating this way for a very short period of time, it begins to develop momentum for itself, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in the right way. And that's been proven true for us, no doubt. We have a few quick questions to wrap up with, but before we do that, I'd love to just quickly hear what a typical day looks like for you, in particular, like what you usually eat and maybe the way you structure your meals through the day, because it may be a little different than what people are used to.
I eat about 6 times a day. And I need to do that. And most people do when they eat this way because you chew up the food pretty fast and when you eat this way. So I get up in the morning at 5 usually. And the first thing I do is I make this superfood smoothie that has bananas and berries and vegetable powders and flax seeds and brewer's yeast and food-grade green tea. And I have 2 pieces of Ezekiel toast with fat-free hummus. That's breakfast.
Nice.
And then I'm hungry a few hours later. And for the rest of the day, I do batch cooking and baking on the weekend. Like I'll, 2 or 3 cookie sheets of sweet potatoes and a sheet of beets. And so I have lots of stuff I've prepared, big pot of soup, this kind of thing. So something like that mid-morning. And then for lunch, I have a great big salad and I'll either have sweet potatoes or vegetables and rice or soup or something of that nature, as much as I want. And then, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, back at it again. 6 o'clock, another big salad, and then, black bean chili, veggie lasagna, baked sweet potatoes, steamed vegetables and rice, and some tofu. A lot of variety, lots of different things, but kind of that theme. And then late at night, I teach until 11 most nights. So my day starts at 5 and it ends at midnight usually, and I teach until 11, 3 or 4 nights a week. And when I finish teaching, I'm hungry, number one, and that's when I have a sweet tooth. So I'll have fruit. And one of my indulgences is big bowls of berries with chocolate balsamic vinegar, which is fat-free. And I mean, it's so good. And if you put it in the refrigerator, it gets syrupy, so it really sticks to the berries. And so I'll have something like that, or apples and pears, or those kinds of things. So I'll have more food at 11 o'clock, and then, an hour later or so I go to bed. So that's the eating style. I eat out a lot, by the way. I have a very busy social life. I helped start the ballet company here. I'm on the director's circle and do a lot of events related to the dance company. So I eat that same eating style out. It's not quite as plain of food, but it's the same pattern. Really.
Wow, my mouth is watering, Pam.
You and I may have some friends, by the way, over at Ohio State's dance department, but that's another story altogether. I have a long history in the dance world.
Me too. I was going to be a professional dancer, and then I realized I'd be a better patron. I thought it would be better to make money and contribute than to try to dance.
Well, I think
so that's what I did.
I think you found the right path. So some quick question to end with. These are questions we ask all of our guests as a way to just sort of create some consistency amongst these wildly diverse topics we're covering. But what book or books, up to 3, would you recommend every human being should read?
Well, I like food over medicine. I'm partial to my own.
Yeah.
But I think China Study is just so foundational.
Yeah.
You got to read it. I think Starch Solution, because there's so much people fail on the vegan diet because they try to eat fruits and vegetables and they don't understand the starch component. And the other side, if you want to call it that, takes advantage of that. See, you need chicken. You're
right.
ready to chew your arm off. So I think Starch Solution is a good one.
And that's Dr. McDougall, is that right?
Yeah. And then I think Neil Barnard's book, Power Foods for the Brain, which also has some information about cardiovascular disease. But the reason I like that book is because there is not a lot written about diet and brain health. And we have a growing epidemic, really, of Alzheimer's disease, to the point that there's a thriving nursing home industry that caters just to those patients. You can make a flat fortune just opening nursing homes that cater to Alzheimer's patients. So I think those are some good books to read. And then for a lot of people don't like to read, and the good news now is there are so many documentaries that people can watch, and that sometimes is better because people will pay attention to that rather than read a book.
And what do you think are the best of those, quickly?
Well, I like Forks Over Knives and Food Choices. There's one I was in a few years ago called Making a Killing about the psych drug industry, and I think that has some value. Cowspiracy is very good.
Yeah.
Vaxxed is really good. Not so much about diet, but it's an important issue. Food Inc. is a good one. So I think there are quite a few of them out there. And one good thing I'm seeing is that there are more being produced all the time. I mean, Mihail Surisky, the producer of Food Choices, is going to make Neil Barnard's new book on cheese into a movie. Cool. So there will be a documentary about cheese coming out sometime probably next year.
And the Cowspiracy guys have a new film coming out, too, called What the Health, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. There are new ones all the time, and they do well. That's the thing that's amazing is they all do well, which says there's a very big appetite out there. So that's good news for everybody, including just our country's economy in general. The more people who do this, the better things will be.
Great. So our next question is really good for you. What's the best meal you've ever had, and why?
Oh my gosh, that would be hard. Well, I have to say I'm so spoiled because in my beautiful, great big building, we have a commercial kitchen, and Chef Del is here. So we eat so well here. It's almost embarrassing. I'd have to say there are a couple that were really memorable for different reasons, okay? And I'll tell you about them. One was I was in San Francisco doing lectures, and a very good friend and patient. You know, if they get all healthy, they don't have to be a patient anymore. Now they can be your friend, right? So she had some health issues and doesn't have them anymore. And she took a week off to drive me around because I can't be trusted with a rental car. Really talented in the health department, directionally impaired. I would have ended up in Idaho, and people get all sideways about that. So anyway, I had met the people who own Millennium Restaurant at the McDougal weekend, and I called him. I said, I'd really like to do something special for this woman who took a week off of her activities to drive me around Sacramento and San Francisco and all this kind of stuff. So we went there. We had I think it was a 7 or 8 course meal, and it was like little tastings, and I'll never forget it. It was fabulous. And my friend was just so excited. She was relatively new to this way of eating, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's one that is, just really sticks out. Another one was I always wanted to get a couple of my colleagues together, Dr. Campbell and a friend of mine who does cancer research, Ralph Moss. And in case you don't know this, Karen Campbell is an amazing cook. I mean, do not ever turn down a dinner invitation there.
Oh, we wouldn't.
And so, yeah, for a variety of reasons. But anyway, Dr. Campbell was giving a lecture at Cornell, and Dr. Moss and I heard the lecture, and Dr. Moss's wife. And then we went back to the Campbell's house, and I got to listen to these two great men and researchers talk all afternoon. And then Karen made this amazing dinner, and we all sat down and ate dinner. And when the evening was over, I thought to myself, if for some reason I would die in my sleep, this would be the way I'd want to spend my last day. The food was amazing. The conversation was amazing. And so that was a very memorable meal, not just because Karen's an amazing cook, but because of the conversation that went on. So that was one. And then when Del turned 50, we both had a book coming out, and our publisher was having a big event in New York for the book festival. So I said, well, how about we stay a few extra days, and that'll be your birthday present. We went to Candle 79.
Oh, yeah.
We
have.
Yeah. So that was a fabulous evening. And I could go on, but I guess the main point I want to make is so many people look at this diet and they think you're going to eat pine cones and tree bark, And if you saw the food that we eat, it's just spectacular. And the meals are just as memorable. We could be having this conversation with anybody who would tell you about family dinners that were so memorable and special occasions, and they were eating chicken and cheese and lasagna, 4-cheese lasagna. And we're talking about exactly the same types of emotional responses and connections, and just with healthy food, and fabulous food.
And I get so excited about plant-based food. I get so excited about the colors and the texture, and it's so vibrant and exciting to me. So I get it. So one last of these last questions. Tell us, what have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know?
In the last 30 days, what have I learned that every person should know? Well, my big fascination right now, my area that I'm doing a lot of research in, is the gut microbiome. And that's a relatively new field of study. And so I've been doing a lot of reading about how the diet preferentially feeds certain bacteria. So that's all very fascinating to me. I think I'll tell you the factoid that I think is really interesting, what your audience would like a lot. I read a book called First Bite, and it's written by a woman named Bea Wilson. She's a journalist who writes about food in the United Kingdom. And she was in the book, she talks about how children learn their tastes and develop a taste. She says it's learned, so it can be relearned. And there actually is a program. It's called different things in different countries, but there's a program that's used in Europe, in France and Finland and Sweden, lots of different countries, that has been proven. It's called Tiny Tastes in some places, and it has other names, but it's been proven to take even the pickiest of eaters and turn them into healthy eaters who will eat a wide variety of foods. It's so successful, for example, that you can take an autistic child who's being tube-fed because the child is so picky that he or she won't eat a repertoire of foods and is literally starving to death. And within 30 days, you can teach the child to eat 40 different foods. so it has been so successful that there are 7,000 people in the country of Finland who've been trained to teach this, and they do it in the schools. And that's, I guess, the thing that I find fascinating is, first of all, that there's something like that you can take picky eaters and turn them into good eaters, and that in some countries the importance of teaching children to eat healthy foods, and a wide variety of them, is such that you can justify training 7,000 people to teach it. Isn't that amazing?
That is really, really cool. Well, before we let you go, I'd love to kind of just hear your thoughts on how people, if they're inspired to get involved or get active, how can people help you realize or advance this mission of yours? And in that process, if you would just talk about where people can find you, the best places to locate you online.
Okay, great. Our website's wellnessforumhealth.com. My email address is pampopper@msn.com. And yes, I do answer my emails within 24 to 36 hours, so you will hear from me personally if you email me. And the best thing you can do to forward our mission is become a member and do business with us, because we self-fund. You have to. If we take investors, we could dilute the message or have the message diluted in significant ways. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I have thought about somebody could come here, and I've suspected in a couple of overtures that have been made, buy this company just to get rid of it, because it would be such a drop in the bucket for a drug company or a medical institution, So we're self-funded. So anytime you decide to become a member and pay dues here, you're supporting all of what we do. And that means all of the legislative efforts. We haven't even gotten to that, but we've influenced the passing of laws in many, many different states. And at the federal level, we're going to continue all that. We're going to continue building a provider network of well-trained people who won't hurt people in the healthcare business.
Right.
And that's how you can help us out.
And I can personally say that you have, through your business, a concierge-type offer where people can, whenever they need to, come to you, or I imagine any of your colleagues or associates, for advice or guidance. And in many cases, sidestepping the traditional medical industry, where it seems like every time you go to the doctor, you come out of it thinking like, geez, I got more wrong with me than I thought.
Right. Or at least if you have to interact with a doctor, which sometimes you do, you go in, eyes open, evidence in hand, to have an informed discussion.
Right.
And that's very important. It's, we're not in a position yet where we have a fully built network and you don't deal with the ineptitude, but we do have a system in place where you can get the right information so that you can make an informed choice. And so unless it's an emergency, and I'm always really clear about this, if you're in an accident and your guts are splattered all over the street, you do not want to read Food Over Medicine and eat a baked potato. I mean, for crying out loud, you get to the hospital.
Right.
You want medicine, right? But for everything else, when something is suggested to you, whatever it is, you can say, that's an interesting idea. I'm going to be looking into that, and I'll be getting back to you and letting you know my decision. That's the right answer in almost all instances. And so the ability to get the right information so you can go back with an informed answer is what we can do for everybody right now.
Got it. Well, listen, Pam, thank you a million for your time. You've been very generous, and I can't tell you how inspiring you are to Teresa and I hope that comes through and infects, pun intended, other people, inspiring them to move forward with a whole foods plant-based diet, because it really works for us and it clearly works for you as well.
Definitely, Pam. Knowing you has already changed my life in so many positive ways, and I'm just so excited to share that with others.
Thank you.
All right. We will let you go. This has been terrific. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. That's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed this incredible conversation with Dr. Pam Popper. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including all of Pam's great work, her books, the Wellness Forum itself, the film she's appeared in, which we do mention in this conversation, and so much more. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Pam Popper. That's ownstream.co/PAMPOPPER.
Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email. at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that, again, at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where I diligently post every day. And you might see some cute pictures of our little gorgeous daughter, Sophia. That profile's address is at own_stream. So Twitter at Ownstream, Instagram at own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.